All right, God is great. And if we haven't thanked him for perseverance in a while, let's thank him for perseverance now in this chapter that reminded me that I haven't been mentioning it, but Hosea has been kind of bothering me because I haven't been able to wrap my mind around it. It is confronting me with a bunch of chapters that are super preachable, but they aren't easy to sum up. I've said that once before, but I think it actually reminds me of Proverbs, ironically enough, because in a lot of these verses, there's a lot of standalone wisdom that does not seem to flow, at least easily, from verse to verse. And so it's tough to summarize, but it's densely packed with a lot of preachable stuff. And so in chapter 7 of Hosea, if there are 16 verses, to me, it seems like there might be 16 different sermons. But I need to get on with summarizing it. So let's just call this chapter I Would, But I Remember. In this chapter, in which God is basically going to remind us of a familiar sub-theme we mention from time to time, and that's just let me forget. When I'm trying to forgive you, let me forget the things that I'm trying to forget. And in this chapter, that's essentially what God is telling them. He would redeem them, but they won't let him forget what he's trying to move on from. Verse 1 beginning, when I would heal Israel, the iniquity of Ephraim is revealed, and the evil deeds of Samaria, for they deal falsely. The thief breaks in, and the bandits raid outside. I'm going to skip ahead to the corollary verse that reminds me of that, where it says in verse 13, woe to them, for they have strayed from me. Destruction to them, for they have rebelled against me. I would redeem them, but they speak lies against me. We'll go through it, God willing, later on, but let's just go through the summary, understanding that that whole concept of I would, but seems to follow most of the verses in this chapter, where verse 2 is going to go on to talk about the way that they don't consider that they are in a position where he remembers all their evil. It's literally going to say their deeds surround them and they are before his face. Thus, even if he'd want to turn one way or the other, he would almost literally have to be in denial to ignore the evil that they are doing. If you live long enough, okay. So he's going to go on from there in a set of verses that are really hard for me to summarize. So I'm just going to basically sum them up, lump sum in verses 4 through roughly 8, talking about the way he's using a bunch of metaphors to describe the way that they are, literally in verse 4, all adulterers. Adulterers being a metaphor for idolaters, people who are so thirsty or desperate to find an alternative to God. That similar to what I think Paul said in his speech or sermon before the Areopagus in the book of Acts, that they were so desperate to hear a new thing that might provide answers, as long as it gave them the opportunity to avoid God, that they lost track of the way that none of those answers were providing them the actual relief that that we all desperately need. And so in their thirst, they're so busy looking for other things that they're losing track of the fact that they're, as we say, from time to time, they're simply walking in circles, intellectually, if nothing, or if in no other way. Beyond that, though, verse 9 is going to seem to describe the way that they have lost track of how they are wasting time in their search for an alternative to God. Verse 9 saying, strangers devour his strength and he knows it not. Gray hairs are sprinkled upon him and he knows it not. God willing, if we are graying, we are realizing the degree to which we are aging, lest I preach myself into a hypocrisy. It's not a sin to age. It's a sin to be unaware or lack the self-awareness of how time is passing you by. While your pursuits, have you really weighed whether or not your pursuits are worth it? God willing, this gives us an opportunity to be introspective and self-aware as to whether or not we are really on a path that is worth it. Verse 10, going on to talk about they have plenty of pride, but again, apparently very little functional wisdom, as verse 11 is going to say, Ephraim is like a dove, silly and without sense. Verse 12 going on to talk about the way in which he is going to allow it to catch up with them as he himself, once again, is going to spread a net over them, reminding us of the times where God, who has described himself as being in relationship with people in much the same way he's in relationship with us, is willing to guide us, but there is only so long he's willing to guide us while we try to pull in another direction. And if we pull in another direction long enough, we may find that he has himself turned to be our enemy. God, please deliver us from being that, I can't think any other word for it, but stubborn. So stubborn that we actually make you our enemy. Verse 12, however, saying that is exactly what has happened to Israel at this point, as he is going to spread his net over them and discipline them, saying, verse 13, woe to them, for they have strayed, reminding us he would redeem them, but they are speaking evil against the one who is actually trying to help them. Verse 14, going on, saying they do not cry from the heart. So there is a point at which, as we've seen in previous chapters, they do cry out to God, because once again, you get bad enough in your life and you'll ask for help, even from people you hate. And so they're crying out to God, but they aren't doing it in sincerity, as the rest of the chapter. Verses 15 and 16 are going to go on to say that he is the one who strengthened them in their days of strength when they were doing well. But once again, they devised evil against him. And in verse 16, they returned, but not upward, or not to anything that represents a healthy set of principles or genuine integrity. Therefore, he's saying their princes shall fall by the sword because of the insolence of their tongues, and they will be an embarrassment to the people that they were otherwise trying to impress. In this case, that's my paraphrase for him saying, this shall be their derision in the land of Egypt. And of all the seemingly preachable points from this passage, the one that I want to focus on for, if no other reason for time's sake, is the one that connects to our title, I Would, But I Remember, a concept that makes me remember my times in benevolence work where helping someone just seemed to pay off because they just did well with what you gave them, whether it was time, money, or all of the above. But I mention that from time to time. The new thing that it seems caught my attention in this passage is something that I mention less, but might be just as much a thing in benevolence work, and that is the amount of time and energy you can seem to waste on those who do not want to do better as much as they want doing wrong to simply pay better. And understanding what God is telling Israel in this circumstance, to me, at least me emotionally, that's where this passage hits me. Understanding that he has grown frustrated in pouring resources into those who seem to have no desire whatsoever to actually do better, as much as they simply want the wrong that they are doing to pay better. And understanding that Israel is not necessarily a poor nation at this time, he is talking about the ways in which their poor choices are depleting them in other ways, no matter how well they are doing financially. And as much as he is willing to form a healthy relationship with them moving forward, forgetting all of the dirt that they had done in the past, the thing that seems to be undermining God's commitment to make peace with his people is their commitment to keep doing wrong.